Welcome to today's edition of the Rush 24/7 podcast of the Rush 24/7 podcast.
Yes, America's anchorman is away, and this is your undocumented anchorman, Mark Stein, all holed up nice and toasty in our sanctuary studio in far northern New Hampshire. EIB does not ask the immigration status of any of its guest hosts. Mark Belling, he's a big-time ISIS commander when he's not guest hosting. Walter Williams is a notorious member of MS-13, but we don't care. We just shove a broomstick through the door handle, and the ice guys outside can't get in. Rush will be back tomorrow. Fortunately, he's taken the day off when there's absolutely nothing going on. So it's a kind of relaxing, slow news day. And that's why an undocumented anchorman is perfectly competent to handle all that. Yesterday, the Vice President of the United States was on the Rush Limbaugh show. Today, just some no-name schlub from Canada, some cheap foreign immigrant labor. What's going on? Well, Chuck Schumer says the Democrats are going to filibuster. They're going to go down filibustering. They're going to filibuster Judge Neil Gorsuch, and Chuck Schumer said he will join with other Democrats in filibustering the nomination. We'll talk about that. 1-800-282-2882. Obamacare, the big vote. There are members of the Freedom Caucus. Freedom is not actually a word that seems to play much of a part in this bill as presently written, but they're currently meeting at the White House, and if all goes well, they may feel it's safe enough to hold a vote on this later today. We're monitoring that situation, and this new health care bill, which is already less popular than Obamacare or Hillary Care or any of these ones, may yet be voted on in the House later today. And the old Trump tapping, Trump being surveilled, as they say, that there have been, obviously there were developments that Rush was talking about yesterday, and there have been developments on the developments. I'm beginning to think this whole business about Russia is just a bit of belated reverse engineering to come up with a cover story as to why these guys were all in the crosshairs of the vast, bloated, so-called intelligence community surveillance apparatus. But people have different views on that, and we'll get to that a bit later. Yesterday's terrorist attack at the Palace of Westminster, 5 dead, including the jihadist, over 40 injured. One of the dead is now known to be an American, Kurt Cochran of Utah. President Trump tweeted in the last hour, "A great American, Kurt Cochran, was killed in the London terror attack. My prayers and condolences are with his family and friends." Kurt Cochran and his wife, Melissa, were there to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. I find stories like this almost unbearably sad, and I don't know how I would feel if I were Kurt Cochran's wife, Mr. Cochran's widow, Melissa, in hospital, recovering from terrible injuries. We hope she recovers. We tend to underplay. These terrorist attacks now come along so often. We tend to focus on the number of dead, and the number of injured is just an afterthought. But as in the Boston Marathon bombings and all of these incidents, many of those injured will be living in pain and with the consequences of those injuries for the rest of their lives. And Melissa Cochran is among those injured yesterday. Her husband is dead. They were celebrating their silver wedding anniversary. They'd been on social media. They'd been in, before they got to the great imperial metropolis, they'd been in Scotland and Ireland and posting pictures on social media en route. And it is not just that her future has been destroyed, her husband is dead, but that your past is as well. Every wedding anniversary from now for the rest of her life, she is going to remember not just the happy days of their long marriage, but also the fact that as they were celebrating a milestone in that long marriage, this guy is killed by a man called Khalid Massoud. We'll come back to him a bit later. Kurt Cochran was one of the first struck by the car. A lot of tourists, a lot of the injured are in yesterday's attack are tourists. Koreans, Romanians, all kind of people. There's tourists all around the Palace of Westminster. It's a big tourist landmark. People want to have photographs of themselves with Big Ben. There's tourists everywhere. And that's a point for the British to consider, as the French have also had to consider. After their big year of terror attacks last year, there were not none, but there were a significantly diminished number of tourists in Paris last summer, and this could have consequences for that too. Kurt Cochran and his wife were walking across Westminster Bridge and were one of the first couples struck by this SUV. I happened to be on Westminster Bridge last summer. It was for a photo shoot, of all things, and my kid was excited because it was a celebrity photographer who liked to photograph. He'd photographed Dominic whatever the guy's name is, Cumberbatch or Cumberbatch, who plays Sherlock Holmes on TV and lots of other things. So I was being photographed there, and he wanted a kind of long shot. So I was on one side of the bridge with nobody around me, leaning back against the railing, and the camera moved over to the other side to get a kind of wide shot of me. And I remember it was a couple of weeks after what happened at Nice, and I'd been in Nice a few days after the truck attack there, and ever since then, when you actually see on the Promenade des Anglais where this truck guy went, for the next few weeks and months afterwards, whenever I was in big cities, I started looking at them in that way, that if you wanted to just mow down pedestrians indiscriminately, what's to stop you? And I was looking at this long, wide bridge over the Thames, a bridge I've walked across innumerable times. If you ever see me on Fox News when I'm coming from London, I do it at a studio that's actually opposite the Houses of Parliament. It's got Big Ben and Parliament in the background. And afterwards, if I'm kind of on a post-performance high, I like to walk back across the bridge at night. And so I'm looking at this long bridge, and I'm looking at the tourists walking across the bridge, and I'm thinking, if you were like that guy in Nice, this is a great place to do this, because there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. If you try and do it on a shopping street, you can always kind of duck through a doorway into a store, or there's an alley or whatever. But on these long bridges over the River Thames, like Westminster Bridge, there is nowhere to go. And so it proved for poor Kurt Cochran. He was either knocked over. There's the river. That's basically where you can go. And if you've ever been in the River Thames, you know it's not something to be entered into lightly. And this is what happened to Kurt Cochran. He was hit by this vehicle, or he either was knocked over the railings, or he chose to jump. And he fell, I think, about 25 feet onto a kind of concrete platform and was killed instantly. His wife was also struck, his wife Melissa, his widow, and she is in the hospital. He was a musician. He liked rock music. He had a recording studio in Utah. He had a great life. He had a wonderful marriage until he decided to celebrate his 25th wedding anniversary by taking his wife on a special, once-in-a-lifetime, never-to-be-forgotten trip to Europe. And as I said, he'd been posting pictures of what they'd been up to in Scotland, Ireland. He goes to the great world city, and he takes his wife across Westminster Bridge to see the Houses of Parliament, one of the most famous landmarks in the world, and a man in a car comes up on the sidewalk and attempts to kill everybody on the sidewalk, and in this case succeeds. Kurt Cochran, American, a great American, as President Trump tweeted, killed in the London terror attack yesterday. And all these stories are different. And I wanted to spend some time with Mr. Cochran because, as I said, they're almost unbearably sad. It's a split second, and for Mrs. Cochran, it's not just that your future is vaporized, but that your past is tainted forever. And this sick, crazed barbarian who did this will be present in all her memories on every wedding anniversary going forward. They've released the name. They've just also, in the last few minutes, they've just released the name of the guy who did it, Khalid Massoud. And we've had I'm so sick, and all the stories are different, which is why I wanted to spend a bit of time with Kurt Cochran, but they're also all the same. And I'm so bored by them being all the same. Khalid Massoud, and everyone says lone wolf. If you're watching CNN, or you're watching MSNBC, or you're watching ABC, CBS, whatever the hell it is, BBC, any newspaper, and they use the phrase lone wolf, pay no further attention to them. Because, as I always say, and as I've said on this show innumerable times, the lone wolves always turn out to be known wolves. And so it is in this case that he had been previously investigated. Theresa May announced in the House of Commons, British Prime Minister announced in the House of Commons yesterday that he'd been previously investigated by MI5. You would think that's a very select group. We're not now talking about needles in haystacks. We're talking about a bunch of needles that have been pulled out of the haystacks and they're being investigated by MI5. Or they're being investigated by the CIA. Or like the guy who decapitated the French priest last summer. He's actually wearing an ankle bracelet that the French state have put on him, but they switched the ankle bracelet off for an hour every morning so that he can have a bit of privacy. And so one day when they switch off the electronic surveillance of his ankle, he goes and slits the throat of a French priest during Mass. And as I always say, these people are not lone wolves, they're known wolves. The security apparatus of Western societies has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in monitoring these people, in investigating these people, in interviewing these people, and yet they still cannot prevent even the known wolves from killing and injuring large numbers of people. This story broke while Rush was on the air yesterday, and he talked about it then. And that's where I first heard about this attack in London. And as I said, I thought about it because I'd happened to spent a fair bit of time on Westminster Bridge in this photo shoot last summer, when the thought of how easy it would be to pull off a car attack there was on my mind. What do you do? What do you do with that situation? There's nowhere to go. You can jump in the river. You can be knocked over and land on those concrete stands, supports for the bridge, 20, 25 feet below, and die, as Kurt Cochran did. So if you don't want that to happen, if you don't want people just driving up onto the pavement, known wolves like Khalid Massoud, or this guy, here we are, and here's another one, hot off the press, in Brussels today. A guy in Antwerp. There's another city I know well. My mum's Belgian, happen to know Antwerp well. A Frenchman, as they say, by which they mean a man of North African descent. He has no allegiance to the French state. He said that's just his passport. That's just a flag of convenience. But citizenship is about allegiance. And so you're not a Frenchman if your allegiance is not to France, any more than this guy, Khalid Massoud, was born in the United Kingdom. He's not a British subject. He has no allegiance to the United Kingdom. It's simply a flag of convenience. So sick of it. All the stories are different, and yet they're all the same. They're all the same. I've been guest hosting this show for years, and these stories come up, boom, 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 all the same every time. So a guy does this in Antwerp, 11 a.m. this morning. 11 o'clock in the morning, a car registered in France drove rapidly towards pedestrians in the centre of Antwerp. Soldiers attempted to intercept the car, but it got away. Tried to mow down some more people. Later stopped by the Antwerp police's rapid response team. They opened the car, and they found knives, like this guy in London. He just kills people with his SUV and 2 kitchen knives. That's all you need. He rented the car, and he had 2 kitchen knives. That's all you need to kill people, injure people, bring the capital city of major Western nations to a standstill. And they found, in this guy in Belgium this morning, they found knives, a riot gun, and a container containing an unidentified substance. Do you know what this guy's name was? Do you know what this guy's name was? Go on, take a wild guess. We're not going to give away the fully loaded Prius for this. Just take a wild guess. Why, yes. Was it Irving? Was it Bud? Was it Elmer? No, his name was Mohammed. Wow, there's a surprise. I would never have got to that. Never would have got to that. Never would have occurred to me. Mohammed. Latest car attack in Brussels this morning. What's this story really about? Is it about banning laptops on Royal Jordanian Airlines until the next gizmo comes along and we have to ban that on Saudi Airlines or Yemeni Airlines, if Yemen's got an airline, or Somali Airlines, or whatever the hell it is next? Keep coming up with banning gadgets and try to keep up with them as they keep coming up with ways. What are we going to do? Ban bread knives? Ban SUVs? This is Mark Stein for Rush, and it's time to actually be honest about what the real issue is here. 1-800-282-2882. We'll take lots of your calls on the Rush Limbaugh Show straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. As I said, I heard about this attack in London. It broke while Rush was on the air yesterday, and he spoke about it then. And I started the morning, I'd gone on television a couple of hours earlier to talk about the 14-year-old schoolgirl in Maryland who'd been very brutally raped by 2 men, at least one of whom was an illegal immigrant. And I say men, she was 14, she was in the freshman class. This guy claims to be 18. According to some age recognition software, he's closer like to 25, 26. But that is actually part of the same story. What happened in Maryland in that bathroom and what happened in London on a far more murderous scale yesterday are part of the same story, which is that our elites decided, on both sides of the Atlantic, decided that Western societies were endlessly pliable and malleable and could just be opened up to anybody and there would be no consequences. And just as mass unskilled immigration, illegal immigration to the United States is not in the interests of American citizens, nor has mass Muslim immigration. These are basically simply for geographic reasons. Latin America is obviously a lot closer to North America, and the Muslim world is a lot closer to Europe. But essentially, they're the same stories. This is a story of political decisions the political class took for which there has never been widespread popular support. Yeah, great to be with you this slow news day. Rush returns tomorrow. But you know something? You're probably sitting there right now. You're unnerved. You're discombobulated by being exposed to a sinister foreign guest host. And you wonder what's up with that. There's a way around it. All you got to do is go to rushlimbaugh.com and become a Rush 24/7 subscriber. And Rush 24/7 means what it says. It means Rush 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can get him in any known medium. hitherto invented or yet to be invented. They got transcripts of the shows. They got archives of the radio shows. They've got the Ditto Cam, so you can look at Rush. They've got new EIB wallpaper that you can put on your computer or your iPhone or whatever. You won't be able to look at it when you're on Royal Jordanian Airlines or Emirates Airlines, but if you're just like flying around Delta, if you're flying to Cleveland, you can look at it. So that's how good it is. Rush 24/7. All you got to do is sign up, and all you got to do to sign up is go to rushlimbaugh.com, and you need never be discombobulated by a sinister foreign guest host ever again. I was talking about how this rape in a high school in Maryland and the terror attack outside Parliament in London are part of the same story. Essentially, the world's elites reached a consensus that the Western world could absorb anybody. If you listen to Democrats now, they're quite open about it. They think all 6.7 billion people in the rest of the planet have some kind of at least theoretical constitutional right to emigrate to the United States of America. Or at any rate, they're not prepared to rule it out, which is why you can't have these travel bans. Because there might be a guy, it's all very well to say, oh, well, we're going to do scrutiny of people from Yemen. But there might be some guy in Yemen who's just going to be a fabulous high school valedictorian in Rockville, Maryland in a couple of years' time. So it's just unfair even to impede his potential progress to becoming the class valedictorian in Maryland. This is how the left thinks now. And if you disagree with that, if you think that immigration is like any other public policy, that it's like health care, or it's like road signage, that it's just a public policy that people should be allowed to express an opinion on, you're a racist, and you shouldn't even be allowed to say it. In fact, right now, I think in the next couple of hours, the Canadian Parliament is going to be voting on an absolutely disgraceful and disgusting resolution in which they will be attempting, in effect, to criminalize Islamophobia, which no one has ever defined. There's no definition of Islamophobia. It's whatever, gets Mohammed's hair in Mohammed's panties in a twist. So no one's defined. It's not a legal concept. So a legislature has no business whatsoever passing any resolution on the matter. Yet the Canadian Parliament is this thing M103, not to be confused with MS13. MS13 is everywhere. M103 is just going to be passed in Ottawa at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And the idea is it's just a resolution to say we've got to be very careful and we oppose Islam. It's a way of shutting you up so that you can no longer state the obvious. So that when you're listening to Rush, like yesterday, and Rush says we're getting some news out of London that a bunch of people have been killed by some guy whose car went up on the pavement and he intentionally mowed them down, and then he got out of his car and he stabbed a policeman who later died. And Rush is telling you all this, and you're not allowed to say, oh, I wonder if that might be some guy of the Islamic persuasion. You're not allowed to think like that. That's the point of this resolution they're voting on in the Canadian Parliament today, and it's the point of all these things. And it's fascinating to me that the actual victims, the real life victims of attacks, as in London, or this rape in Maryland, the reaction of officialdom is always the same. So these really sleazy, slimy, third-rate public officials in Maryland who barely waited until this girl had been rescued from the bathroom and taken away. They could barely wait for that before they go and pass their sanctuary state bill. in the Maryland legislature, because to them it's all about, oh, well, you know, we don't want to give the impression that every single undocumented American, fine upstanding member of the undocumented American community is a potential gang rapist. And that's always their go-to position. Just as in London, the go-to position is always that, oh, we don't want to lend any credence to the right wing in their appalling Islamophobia. That might provoke a backlash against Muslims and all the rest of it. Or it might lend support to Marine Le Pen becoming president of France or whatever. All the concern is always for, you know, you having a hypothetical bad thought about an illegal Hispanic or a fella called Muhammad. It's never about the actual victims of these things. Now, we had town meeting day in New Hampshire. I used to love town meeting day. Actually, can you pull that up, print that thing up? I want to make sure I get the names of these towns correct. So can you just get that printed out? And our town meeting day, I used to love, Tocqueville loved town meeting. When he came to America, he thought, and he traveled around New England, he thought that the town meeting system of government was the best system of government that had ever been devised. And when I came to New Hampshire, like over a century and a half after Tocqueville, and I felt the same way. I went to town meeting, and I thought it was great. You know, they'd propose putting a fence around the town dump, and they budgeted $600 for the fence. And then everyone would sit around talking for the next 40 minutes about whether we really needed a $600 fence around the town dump or whether a $300 fence would do. And I agreed with Tocqueville. I thought this was the greatest system of government that had ever been devised. Well, it was town meeting day in New Hampshire last week, I think it was. And three small towns, you know, because we've heard about sanctuary cities, and then we've heard about universities becoming sanctuary campuses, and then we've heard that California and Maryland are talking about becoming sanctuary states. And in New Hampshire on town meeting day, 3 towns voted to become sanctuary cities on town meeting day. They're not cities. These are 3 towns with around 1,000 people each in them. They voted to become sanctuary villages. That's the nuttiness now to which a once great state like New Hampshire has become prone. This is, I think it's technically the 4th whitest state in the nation. I think it's Vermont, Maine and Wyoming and then New Hampshire. And it's basically 90, whatever it is, 94, 95, 96% white. I believe there are 7 Hispanics somewhere way down in southern New Hampshire. And it's rumored, I think there's like 3 black guys who've got a vacation cottage down by the lake. It's like the whitey-whiteyest. It's whiter than Elizabeth Warren. That's how white this state is. And yet, 3 towns of about 1,000 people voted on town meeting day to become sanctuary villages. So they're now there, and they're all like cute little upscale. They're not like the broken down towns hollowed out by heroin and meth. They've got no illegal aliens. They've got no problems. They just thought they'd turn town meeting day, the best system of government ever devised, according to Tocqueville, into an opportunity for posturing and virtue signaling. And one of these towns, I know, I've been in all 3 of them, but one of them is like, it's a half-hour ride, 40-minute ride south of here. One of these towns, they're Lyme, Harrisville, and Dublin, and one of them's a little way south here of EIB, and it's an upscale, little, picture-perfect New England village. And it's full of like 30 years ago it would have been full of like nice broken down hard scrabble farmers and all the rest of it. And then all the trusty fundies moved in, so it's now got trusty fundies and wealthy retirees and Dartmouth professors, and you can't really get any property there for like less than $500,000 which is a lot in New Hampshire. And so they voted to become a sanctuary village. They've got no immigrants. They've got nothing illegal or legal. They've got no minorities. They got nothing. So I'm just saying to you, so they're just doing it. They're like the trusty fundies. They never have to live with the consequences. It's not like Rockville, Maryland, where you're being dragged into the high school bathroom and raped and sodomized. There's no danger of that happening at this shishy little New Hampshire bedroom community of Dartmouth professors and trusty fundies and multi-million-dollar retirees. No, sir. So I'm just saying, if you're an MS-13 gang member and you're finding Massachusetts is getting a little bit too hot for you, you can't handle the Boston suburbs anymore, why not head to Lyme, Harrisville, or Dublin, New Hampshire? They're beautiful, and they've just said, come on down for you. Lyme has the longest contiguous run of horse sheds in New England. Now, doesn't that sound beautiful? It's right next to the handsome Congregational Church. Line of horse sheds, a long line of horse sheds with all the old Yankee families who settled the town, their names above it. It's fantastic for gang rape. You can't get better to gang rape in those horse sheds. It's great to deal heroin there. It's fabulous, fabulous place to deal heroin. If you're an ISIS guy and you're trying to assemble your suicide bomber belt because you want to blow up next year's Boston Marathon, there's no better place to do it than to come to one of these three little picture-perfect New Hampshire old-time town common type towns with all the cute little clapboard houses and the beautiful weathered colonial paint colours and all the rest of it, and the nice little general store. Why waste your time in the Boston suburb? Come on down, MS-13. Come on up. New Hampshire is pining for you. So if you're an MS-13 guy and you can't hack it in Massachusetts anymore, come to one of these three New Hampshire communities that voted to become sanctuary villages on town meeting day in New Hampshire. Dublin, Harrisville, or Lyme. You will have the time of your lives. And that is it. Virtue signaling, posturing, poser empathy with no thought of the consequences. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll take your calls straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. Let's go to Patrick in El Paso, Texas. Patrick, you're live on America's #1 radio show. Great to have you with us.
Great. Thank you so much. And Mark, I'm a big fan of yours as well as Rush. I think that you guys bring a lot of integrity and a very important message to all Americans.
Well, you sound like you got a wee hint of an accent, Patrick. Where are you from originally?
I'm actually from Belgium. You mentioned Belgium. I'm from Belgium and France.
Okay.
And the problem you were referring to, this is nothing new to the Belgium.
No.
Over the last 40 years, approximately 500,000 of people coming from North Africa. We failed to integrate them properly, but at the same time, there was a large portion of them who didn't want to integrate. And also through the huge immigration problem that we had over the past few years, people coming from Syria that could not be vetted. And I'm a retired Green Beret officer. I know a lot of people that are still working in the Special Forces. They will tell you our intelligence is very clear. Around 20% of the people that are coming from Syria cannot be vetted.
Right.
So, this left-wing ideology in the U.S. that we could, but possibly vet people is ridiculous. And I think that we are very lucky that President Trump was elected. It was an historical point in the history of this country.
Right.
And it is very, very important for the safety of the country to start protecting our border and to do what we need to do. Because
no, you're right, Patrick. Tell me something, Patrick. Where are you from in where are you from in Belgium? My mother was Flemish, but you're a Walloon. Which part of Belgium are you from originally?
Actually from the German part of Belgium.
Oh, right.
I was raised in Brussels.
Oh, right.
So I speak French, Dutch, and German.
But
in the U.S.
But you've seen what's happened in Brussels. If you're in large parts of Brussels, particularly in the evening, You don't see Flemings or Walloons on the street. The future of the city, the young people on the street in the evening are basically now the North African immigrants, the Muslim immigrants on the streets of Brussels and Antwerp and other Belgian cities.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this is an issue that is extremely serious because you have a security issue, and the naivete of our politician has been absolutely incredible. I mean, we have left-wing socialist ideology where obviously these people who have been governing Belgium for more than 40, 50 years believe that they are intellectually superior and always know.
Right.
And in the name of their ideology, they have failed to protect the Belgian citizen.
Yep.
So it is refreshing to have somebody like our president who says we need border security, because in France and Belgium we have failed to do that.
No, you're absolutely right, and their whole thing is that essentially you demonstrate your compassion by how many people you let into the country, no matter how explicitly hostile to you those people are. Patrick, thank you for your call, and I'm relieved to hear that you're not living in Molenbeek, but that you are safe on the West Texas streets of El Paso. This is Mark Stein in for Rush. Lots more of your calls and the day's news straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. As I mentioned at the top of the show, in case you haven't heard, the Democrats have announced they are going to filibuster Neil Gorsuch. The penetrating questioning of the Dems like Patrick Leahy and Al Franken did not persuade Gorsuch to cringe and slink away from the Senate in disgrace. So Chuck Schumer has announced that they are going to filibuster him. This is a pathetic spectacle. But as Rush discussed yesterday, what it depends on is Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans facing down Chuck Schumer and just saying to him, do you guys want to lose fast or do you want to lose slow? Because that's your choice here. Either way, you lose, losers. Pick which way you want to lose. And the question is whether McConnell and the Senate Republicans are prepared to do that. Lots more still to come. Yes, America's Anchorman is away. This is your EIB Anchor Baby. Honoured to be with you. Mark Stein, no supporting paperwork whatsoever. If you're one of the many people traumatized by the new Trump terror and you're fleeing the country, if you're fleeing to the bosom of Canada, as so many people are, because who doesn't like to take solace in a Canadian bosom when the whole powder keg goes up? If you're one of those people and you're fleeing the country, do swing by and say hello. You can't miss us. We got a big sign out on the highway saying last rush guest host before the border, and we're always thrilled to see you. We're coming to you live from what I believe is the first sanctuary studio in the history of American radio. We did vote. EIB voted to make itself a sanctuary studio. If you're listening with the volume high, you can probably hear the ice guys outside just banging on the door. I think they're getting the bazooka out from the sound of it. Can you just have a look? See, that's what they're getting out of the old trunk of the car. As I mentioned in the previous hour, 3 New Hampshire townships voted to become sanctuary villages. None of them have got any immigrants, illegal or otherwise. They're the whitey-whiteyest communities. And it's so boring, isn't it? So boring being all white and upscale. And so it's nice to signal how... It's just nice to signal that you care about these strange people, exotic types far away that you never have to see. So as I said, what are these towns again? I think we should make them famous. Dublin, Harrisville, and Lyme, New Hampshire. They're all about 1,000 people each. So if you're... It only takes a couple of you get a couple of flat-bottom skiffs going across the Rio Grande and you head straight to these towns. It's only going to take a couple of buses and you'll outnumber all these whitey-white upscale Trustafarian natives. If you're an MS-13 gang member in Massachusetts and it's all getting the heat's too much there. It's very competitive now because there's so many illegal immigrant gangs in some of these Massachusetts towns. You've got to be a really good illegal immigrant gang just to get a slice of the action. New Hampshire, these New Hampshire villages are wide open. You could be the king of Harrisville. You could be the capo di tutti capi of Dublin. You could be the mob kingpin of Lyme. These are towns with just 1,000 people. They're like wealthy retirees. They're upscale trust fund babies. They're like Dartmouth professors. And you could be the king. So if you're any MS-13 members there and you're thinking the gang rape scene is like getting pretty boring in Massachusetts, just head up to these 3 New Hampshire communities that voted on town meeting day to become sanctuary villages. Mark Stein in for Rush. We are following all developments. They are meeting at the White House, critical members of the House of Representatives, to see whether they're going to be able to support President Trump's and Paul Ryan's bill that is supposedly the first stage at reforming Obamacare. And they may, if they think they have the votes, they may vote on it today. But right now, a lot of these people, there was a big change somewhere between lunchtime and evening yesterday afternoon. It's always the way with this thing. I'll say this just off the top of my head. I hate talking about process because process here sucks. You know, all you have to do is look at the waste of time Gorsuch hearings, whatever point Senate hearings might once have had, when Al Franken is talking about that truckers case. You know that whatever the founders had in mind when they came up with this Senate hearing stuff no longer applies. So I can't stand process stories. And right now Obamacare is a process story because they're about arm twisting to see whether they can persuade the 25 to 30 people they got to swing to get this thing through the House of Representatives. And when it gets through the House of Representatives, it will still be Obamacare. That's to say, the health care arrangements of the United States will still be a great, big, steaming, postulating oozing sore of entitlements, regulations, and government mandates with tax implications, none of which is anything to do with your hernia. So the whole purpose of... So in a sense, Obama wins. They won't call it Obamacare. They may actually call it Ryan Care, Trump Care. Certainly, that's Trump Care is what Chuck Schumer's been floating. And if it catches on, he's going to ride it all the way through the 2018 midterm elections. But what absent a real transformative act from Trump, and I think Trump is more likely to think outside the box than Ryan or McConnell or any of the Republican leadership on this, precisely because Trump isn't particularly ideological in that sense. But we are going to wind up with a complex morass and a 4,000-page bill. In fact, the Republicans have now been reduced to the old Nancy Pelosi line. The Republicans are basically saying we have to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it, and then we can get on to phase 2, where we might be able to fix some of the stuff that was in phase 1. So they're actually offering a more sophisticated version of the Nancy Pelosi bill. We have to pass this bill so we can find out what's going to be in the next bill. And either way, all we know is that it's going to get more complicated, more expensive. Your premiums are going to go up. Your deductibles are going to go up. The cost of getting anything done in the American healthcare system is going to go up. And I would say, actually, when I listen to people talk about this, that what most people, and of course what happened, Ann Coulter, bless her, made this point before the last election when Romney lost to Obama, that was the last time you could, if you wanted to kill Obamacare, that was the time to do it. Because once the goodies had kicked in, like the fact that you can't be denied insurance for a pre-existing condition, and you can stay on your parents' health care until you're 26. Once those had become baked in and people had got used to them, they would never wish to give them up, which is the case. And that she turned out to be absolutely right about that. So now Republicans are figuring out a way to keep the bits of Obamacare that people have gotten used to, but that somehow ameliorate the rest. So it's going to be more complicated, it's going to be more bureaucratic, it's going to be more expensive, and the only difference is that instead of calling it Obamacare, it'll be called Ryan Care or McConnell Care or Trump Care, and it'll be hung round the Republicans' neck in the 2018 election. And the problem is that it's destroyed everything, that there's most advanced nations have a private healthcare system and a public healthcare system. That's what they have in Italy. That's what they have in Switzerland. That's what they have in Sweden. And this is neither. And under the Republican reforms, it's still going to be neither. Obviously, if you can get insurance, if you can fall off your roof and break your back, and then go to Blue Cross Blue Shield and get health insurance for falling off the roof and breaking your back, then whatever that is, it is no longer insurance. And so it will just join the long list of words in modern life that no longer mean what they once did. University being a good point. Education, more generally, education used to be a process in which you learned things and you were given the tools that enabled reasoning and logical thinking that enabled you to amass knowledge and deduce certain things from that knowledge. And now it just means being socially engineered to strike the correct attitudes on transgendered bathrooms. So education doesn't mean education anymore. Insurance doesn't mean insurance. And the Republicans are going along with that. And they would be far better. I think there's actually great peril in doing all this Obamacare light, as Rand Paul calls it. And that the object here ought to be to get to a a genuine private health care system for those who want the freedom to make their own decisions about health care, and a public health care system that is for those who, for whatever reason, cannot afford or cannot exhibit the competence to make their own healthcare arrangements. And instead we're going to carry on with this great push-me-pull-you of neither one thing nor the other, but a private-public morass where we have essentially killed private insurance, because the very definition of insurance, it means making provision so that you insure a form of security for an event that may or may not happen. We've destroyed the meaning of the word insurance, so we've killed the possibility of genuinely private health care without government interference, and yet we do not provide universal public health care. So instead we have all the inconveniences of public health care and all the inefficiencies of public health care and all the bureaucratic complications of public health care, but with none of the guaranteed access of public health care. And we have all the expense and then some of private health care, but with none of the great privilege of private health care, which is that you are treated as a valued customer, able to reach your own decisions on what you want without the intervention of multiple third parties, whether government or bureaucrats or anybody else. So we've got nothing. We've got the worst elements of public healthcare and the worst elements of private healthcare, and the Republicans have decided to double down on that because they can't figure out a way to get rid of Obamacare and actually restore private and public healthcare in this country. So that's the morass, and we're monitoring what's going on at the White House. We've got a little bit of a mole inside the White House, so if we get any news from there before the end of the show, we're going to bring it to you. And also, I believe we've got Pete Hoekstra coming up shortly. He's going to talk to us about Devin Nunes and the business of surveillance of Trump and those around him that has been going on a long time and does not, in fact, appear to have any genuine intelligence purpose about it. So we will, or counterintelligence purpose to it. So we will keep our eye on those two stories and, of course, take your calls, 1-800-282-2882. Mark Stein in for Rush. Lots more still to come. Yes, we're boogieing on America's #1 radio show, boogieing into the abyss. Gang rape and mass murder, terrorist attacks. We're covering all the big stories. We were fortunate to have 2 uteruses, and if 2 uteruses aren't a big story, I don't know what is. A transgender man gives birth to his own daughter after his wife was unable to fall pregnant. This is a story out of Columbus, Ohio. A man who was born... I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered with it. We've all got 2 uteruses these days. That's it. We're moving into a 2 uterus world, really. I mentioned these 3 New Hampshire towns have voted to become sanctuary villages. They've all got just 1,000 people in town meeting day. And I said, if you're like a big MS-13 gang member in Massachusetts, you want a kind of quieter market. The other thing to remember is these are all one-man police department towns. They've basically just got one constable in these towns, like little one-man police department. You can have the run of the joint, and they've basically hung a big sign out saying welcome. 3 in Tocqueville is turning over in his grave at the reduction of town meeting to upscale liberal posturing, virtue signaling meaninglessness. 3 all-white, whitey-whitest New Hampshire villages declaring themselves sanctuary villages when they haven't got an undocumented immigrant in sight. And nobody can afford to move there. So it's never going to be their daughters getting gang raped in the school bathroom. But the point to bear in mind, if you're an MS-13 member, is they've all got one-man police departments, So you can pretty much have the run of the joint. Let's go. Speaking of New Hampshire, let us go to my Granite State neighbor, little ways south east of me in Wilmot, New Hampshire. Mary, you're live on the Rush Limbaugh Show. Great to have you with us, Mary.
It's wonderful to hear your straightforward, Mike, and a big hello to you. Thank you for being there.
Thank you, Mary. Did Wilmot vote to become a sanctuary town on town meeting day?
No, and we have one police officer, sometimes two. There may be a part-time one.
Yeah.
So, and I just heard on the radio this morning about a police officer who only works part-time, and that's how many of the towns are up here.
Yeah, no. That's the way. Happy the town that only needs a single customer, a single constable. Right. What's on your mind, Mary?
Well, a couple of things, Mike.
Mark.
Put out, Mark.
Mike's answering the phone, I think.
Right, Mark. Right. First, my condolences to the family and friends who have been touched by these sick people who cause global pain. I'm so sick and tired of it.
No.
And I am so thankful for Trump during these times, for he has the backbone, integrity, and the logic and intelligence to unravel the chaos that this liberal government has created. And they hate him because he wants to create well-being and bring, I say bring on the health care and bring on the wall. And I'm for anything that's going to make this country stronger and better. And second, I feel like this liberal government is the biggest gang out there. They're unwilling to see the truth. They're unwilling to see the hurt and the pain, and are unwilling to listen to its people, for chaos is their purpose. And the more off-balance people are, the easier they will be able to manipulate and feel like they have greater power. So I want my voice to be heard, and I know the people of this country want their voices to be heard. And my sleeves are rolled up, and I kind of go, well, now what?
Right.
Because I'm just a person out there.
No, well, your voice has been heard, Mary, and actually just by speaking up and letting your voice be heard, you deny this liberal government, as you call it, by which you mean not just the government, but the permanent bureaucracy that is trying to undermine Trump, and these little district court judges here and there that are presuming to conduct the foreign policy of the United States, and all the other nonsense. Just by speaking up, you deny one of the things that they are most wedded to, the idea that key elements of public policy should never be discussed. And that's why when you want to discuss things like the border wall, or whether you want to discuss what happened in London, or whether you want to discuss what happened at Rockville High School, they want to make it about racism, they want to make it about hate, they want to make it about Islamophobia or whatever, because they don't, in the end, all those words all mean the same thing. They just mean you shut up and you leave it to us, because we know better than you. So just by speaking up, Mary, you have reminded us that these people do not have the right to tell you or anybody else to shut up. And only very weak ideas demand the protection of censorship. If an idea is not strong enough to be vigorously, publicly debated, then there is something wrong with it. And that is why they want to tell you, no, you can't talk about immigration, no, you can't talk about climate change, you can't talk about nothing. Yes, fear not, Rush returns live tomorrow to take you through the final day of the week with authentic, all-American, American as apple pie excellence in broadcasting. Accept no substitutes. It's great to be joined by the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. This has been a hell of a week for the House Intelligence Committee, one way or another, starting with James Comey's testimony on Monday and carrying through to yesterday's visit to the White House by the present chairman to show the president the information and intelligence he had relating to President Trump and selected advisors. And so it's a great privilege to be joined by the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra. And it's great to have you on the show. Has there was never a week quite as kind of strange as this during your tenure on the committee, I take it?
Well, I'm not quite sure about that, Mark. I mean, I was on the committee when we went through waterboarding, renditions, enhanced interrogations, black sites, and those kinds of things. But you're right. This has been one heck of a week for the intelligence community and a tremendous amount of work for the committee now to do.
Now, when you talk about your successor's visit to the White House yesterday, and obviously he gave a rather breathtaking announcement, and he subsequently, I believe, apologized to Democrat colleagues for not showing it to them before he went to the White House. But putting that aside, what is it that, as you can best tell, that he actually has to show them?
Well, here's my understanding, and I got some inklings of this on Tuesday, and I was trying to go to some different sources and verify it because they are remarkable allegations. And on Wednesday, the chairman of the committee validated and verified and became the second source for what I'd heard earlier in the week. The bottom line here, Mark, is it appears that, yes, there was incidental collection of Americans, specifically by the intelligence community, of people on the president's transition team. So this is after the election, and this is before the president is sworn into office. These are Americans, and they're
right.
they're the next administration,
right.
And there's evidence that these, and remember, these are supposed to be deep six. No one's ever supposed to see this because this is collection that our foreign intelligence agencies, they're not authorized to collect this information. That is beyond the scope of their legal authority. So they're supposed to deep six this.
Right.
And Mike Rogers, the head of NSA, said on Monday, we've got very strict procedures. This stuff is minimized. It never makes it out, and unless significant hurdles are passed. It appears that some of these transcripts of these conversations made their way to the White House. You can't do that. It doesn't go to the White House. And you can only imagine if it made it to the White House, who's reading these transcripts? Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, Valerie Jarrett, maybe the president. Who knows who's reading these things? But they should never have access to these kinds of transcripts. And you know that Mike Rogers and Director Comey, because this is such sensitive information, you know that they are aware that these transcripts have made it to the White House and that there are people in the White House reading these transcripts of conversations of the incoming administration. And as Devin Nunes said yesterday, it had nothing to do with Russian surveillance, and there's no inkling here at all that it had anything to do with national security.
No, so just to be clear on what people are talking about here, Pete, what it is essentially raw intelligence. In other words, the original version has the names and the transcripts of these persons, and that as it passes from the originating foreign intelligence agency, the names are supposed to be redacted, and any identification that would lead you to those names is also supposed to be redacted, so that in the event Ben Rhodes is sitting around in the White House and it comes up on his desk, he can't actually identify who they're talking about in there. That's how it's meant to.
Correct.
Right. And yet it somehow wound up that all these names got out. So how does that happen?
Yeah, but the other thing here, Mark, is there has to actually even be a compelling reason to even take a redacted version and to distribute it and to get it to the White House. These things are not normally distributed. There's even there's a hurdle that you have to cross to even transcribe these conversations that include Americans and to send it somewhere. When I was at the Gang of Eight, the leaders of the intelligence community in the House and the Senate, I don't think I ever saw raw intelligence. They don't, because we are a consumer of intelligence. The only people who see raw intelligence are those that analyze it and give a briefing to policymakers. Policymakers typically do not get raw intelligence.
Right.
And there are indications that raw intelligence made it to the White House.
Right. And then once that has happened, then all Mike Rogers' assurances are essentially meaningless, where he says we've got very strict protocols in place to ensure that these names remain masked, and clearly none of that ever happened. So in this case, the question is what's behind this? Democrats think that what's behind this is there's a major national security scandal in which a hostile foreign power attempted to hijack an American election. There's no Russian component to this raw intelligence. There's no national security component to this raw intelligence. What there is, in fact, is just a lot of eavesdropping on Trump and people around him. So what's behind this? What drove this to happen?
Well, all you need to do is take a look at what happened to Mike Flynn. Were they reading transcripts about Mike Flynn and then reading press reports? Or did they decide that they were going to release selectively information to the press? We still don't know who leaked what were apparently transcripts of intercepted calls between Mike Flynn and perhaps the ambassador to Russia or other calls. Where this leads you to is a very uncomfortable place, that the tools of the intelligence community were used by individuals in the government for political reasons.
Right.
That's a horrific charge, but one that now Mike Rogers and Director Comey are going to have to defend their comments and their statements on Monday, because this seems to fly directly in the face of their testimony on Monday about how effective they are at keeping America's intelligence community focused on foreigners and away from spying on Americans.
Now, I just want to be clear on what you're saying there, Pete, because it takes us fairly far down into Banana Republic territory, where the organs of the state do not work for the state, but they, in a sense, work for the ruling elite and the ruling party, and the party uses the organs of the state to serve its political interests against its political enemies. And what seems to have happened here is that the most lavishly funded intelligence bureaucracy in the world, on a scale that no other nation can begin to dream of, that those resources were channeled not into a genuine area of national security or foreign policy, but were essentially used to gather information on one party's political enemies and then to act upon the knowledge they inquired. I mean, are you prepared to actually walk that far down the road here?
Well, I'm not walking down that road. Clearly, if you listen very closely to what Devin Nunes was saying yesterday, that is what he was alluding to based on the information, and that's why he went directly to the president.
Right.
And I think that's appropriate because the president has responsibility for managing the intelligence community, and the responsibility of Devin Nunes as chairman of that committee is to inform the president that there may be inappropriate behavior that has occurred in the intelligence community, and that is part of his oversight responsibility. And his oversight responsibility is he's called the chairman for a reason, and Adam Schiff is called the ranking member for a reason. And I think I know Devin said, hey, Adam, I'm sorry I didn't share it with you first, but Devin has a responsibility as chairman to the American people and to the president to inform the president if he believes that there is potentially significant wrongdoing and inappropriate and perhaps illegal activity going on in the intelligence community. I support Devin, and I think he was fine going to the president first.
So what we have here is actually more serious than whether a foreign power is attempting to influence U.S. elections, because all major powers do that to some degree or another, as and when they can, all over the world. We have something more serious than Russia interfering in the political processes of the United States. We have actually a part of the United States government bureaucracy interfering in the election processes of the United States, in the political processes of the United States. And we have the most...
That is where this ultimately may lead to. Obviously, the intelligence community, or the intelligence committees, are going to have to do a tremendous amount of work. But if there was raw intelligence, even if these transcripts were included in an intelligence reports on the Trump campaign, were included in briefings to people at the White House, that's inappropriate and probably illegal.
Now, let me ask you a question, Pete, because you've said explicitly here that it's not just inappropriate, but probably illegal. Do you think that Comey and Rogers knew exactly what had gone on when they were testifying on Monday?
Oh, of course they did. You don't send these transcripts. Remember what Mike Rogers from the NSA was asked, how many people can unmask names?
Right.
And the answer was 20. Right?
Yeah.
And then, and if these transcripts, and remember, this stuff is never supposed to leave NSA after they've collected it. So for it to leave, for some of the names to be unmasked, and for others to remain masked, but if you read it, it's kind of very apparent who you're talking about. If that material then makes it over to the White House, you got to bet that Mike Rogers and Jim Comey, they knew about this. And they didn't touch this at all on Monday. And they will come back and say, well, no one really ever asked us about that. And that's, that gets to be a problem. Yes, there maybe should have been better questions, but this is so startling and such major news. They should have informed the committee either in the public portion of the hearing or they should have informed them in a private session, a classified session. But obviously from the chairman's behavior yesterday of going to the White House, he wasn't informed by James Comey. He wasn't informed by Mike Rogers. Thank goodness somewhere in the intelligence community, it appears there's a whistleblower who recognized how serious these events may have been and decided to present this information directly to the chairman.
Thanks very much for telling us about this, Pete. You're going to be writing about this in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow, and we shall look for that with interest,
Yes.
and I'm sure Rush will be picking up and talking about it on tomorrow's show. Mark Stein on the EIB network. More straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. I just want to go back over what Pete Hoekstra was telling us there. Pete is a former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, does exactly the job Devin Nunes does, and he said that the reason why Devin Nunes went straight to the White House to show this to the president is because what happened is very serious law-breaking at the highest level. Obviously, if someone in some obscure branch office of the DMV happens to leak something, there's a limit to the damage that can be done, even if it's a technical breach of the regulations or the law. But in this case, the most protected information that the government collects, with the most elaborate security protocols on it, that should never have left the source agency that collected it, somehow made its way to the White House, where the usual political hacks, and I'm being bipartisan here, just sitting around, were able to see it, including all the guys around Obama, Ben Rhodes, Susan Rice, political people, were able to see intelligence collected on U.S. citizens and then use that intelligence. And the other point Pete Hoekstra made is that, in a sense, we were watching a theatrical production on Monday, because Comey and Rogers undoubtedly knew the truth and had what lawyers call and judges call a duty of candor to the tribunal. A duty of candor to the tribunal. And both men abused that duty of candor by not disclosing in either public or private session the extreme, gross breach of the most profound and important security protocols that had gone on. This is way better, way bigger than what Putin thinks of Hillary. That's just a lot of flim-flam Comey threw out there as a big distraction. Who cares what Putin thinks of Hillary? Who maybe he has a strong opinion on Chelsea. I don't care about that either. But I do care about whether the darkest, deepest, most secretive institutions in the deep state, so-called, are actually leaking in the service of one political party against that political party's opponents. That's far more serious than anything Putin did to supposedly undermine the U.S. election. Mark Stein for Rush. We have lots more still to come. Speaking of Chelsea Clinton, Variety is going to honour Chelsea with a Lifetime Achievement Award at its Women in Power luncheon next month. She's big for her spectacular. She's the only woman who's given six-figure speeches on diarrhea in Africa, and she's been relentless about it. So Chelsea Clinton is going to get a Lifetime Achievement Award from Variety next month, and you got to admit, you know, just when you think they can't beat themselves, like this is the absolute acme. This is funnier than Obama's Nobel Prize. It's brilliant, this. Yes, well, he sounded like he was cut off in mid declaration there. But this is Mark Stein sitting in for Rush. America's Anchorman is away, and this is your EIB Anchor Baby. Delighted, honoured to be here from our sanctuary studio in far northern New Hampshire. Mr. Snerdley is keeping an eye on things from sunny South Florida, and in the great metropolis of New York City, Mike and Greg are ensuring that, notwithstanding the absence of the host, the show doesn't get too bad today. Just gets a little substandard, just kind of derails, just kind of goes off the tracks here and there. It was a tough act to follow because the Vice President of the United States on yesterday, so you're going from the Vice President to an undocumented anchorman, cheap foreign labour. It's quite a come down, but Rush himself is going to be back for Open Line Friday tomorrow. And you can ameliorate the pain of Rush's occasional absences by becoming a subscriber to the Limbaugh letter. Not a whiff of fake news in the Limbaugh letter because it comes direct from Rush, and each edition contains a mix of Rush's unmistakable takes on what's going on in the world, plus interviews with top thinkers from hither and yon. In the current issue, the March issue, he's talking to Salina Zito, who was one of the first to get the Trump movement right and to call the election right. And that's important. As I've said, I believe that commentators can differ on this and that, but they have to actually understand what's going on and capture the scene accurately. And there's all kinds of people who called the last election wrong. All kinds of people. In fact, you can find whole networks, so-called networks, staffed entirely by people who got the last election wrong. So you deserve people who actually understand what is happening and call the scene correctly. And that's what Salina Zito did, and she's interviewed by Rush in the new edition of the Limbaugh letter. And if you subscribe now, you'll get a bonus issue free, and you'll also get Rush's bonus report, Keep Fighting. So that's like an annual subscription for 13 months. That's like a Greek pension. If you're a Greek government worker and you retire, you get 13 monthly payments every year. That's how it works in Greece. And we don't go for that socialist nonsense at the EIB network, except when it comes to the Limbaugh letter, where we give you 13 issues for your free for your annual subscription. To get, all you got to do is go to rushlimbaugh.com and hit the Limbaugh letter button, which you will see there. You can get it in digital or in print. Terrific to be with you. And I found that a fascinating insight from Pete Hoekstra, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, we were speaking to about half an hour ago. He's got a piece coming up in tomorrow's Wall Street Journal. And I said at the top of the show that I thought this whole Russian nonsense was really a kind of reverse engineering to find a retrospective cover story for what certain persons had been doing, if we're to believe James Comey, and I'm not sure I do believe him, actually, on the grounds that, as I say, if he'd just been a lawyer appearing in some rinky-dink little county court, he'd owe a duty of candour to the tribunal. Certain things are so important that you don't wait to be asked a question of them. You have a duty as an officer of the court to bring that to the attention of the court. Now, in this case, he has the committee that is responsible for the oversight of the intelligence community in the United States. And Pete Hoekstra was very clear about this, that both Comey and Rogers knew that a fundamental breach of the protocols of the deepest of deep state intelligence had happened. That, in fact, material that should never have gone beyond the small originating team in whichever intelligence agency, foreign intelligence agency, first uncovered it. Because there's rules about just, I mean, for a start, I can't, again, my eyeballs start to glaze over when I explain this, but there's whatever it is now, 16 or 17 different intelligence agencies officially. And they have multiple overlapping roles. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why the director of the FBI is expressing his view on what a foreign leader thinks of Hillary Clinton. What business that is of a domestic law enforcement agency, I have no idea. But we have all these multiple overlapping agencies, and the reality is that if you're monitoring some foreigner, some non-U.S. person, and you have U.S. citizens whose names or identifying characteristics come up in that, that is supposed to be covered, masked, at source by whichever intelligence agency and analysts first uncovered it. In this case, they're all sitting around in the White House, all the political hacks. And I say that in a bipartisan way because I'd be as upset about this if it were Republicans as well as Democrats, because they're all getting the inside dirt on their enemies. It's not supposed to happen. It's far more serious than what Putin thinks of Hillary Clinton. So Comey, who is a very weird, very strange figure to be head of the FBI, he's far weirder than all the stupid things that they say about J. Edgar Hoover, that, well, they can't even do those jokes anymore, because if J. Edgar Hoover liked to walk around in ladies' clothing, as they would do, they remember when they were making all those cracks 20 years ago, that he liked to dress up in women's clothing, old J. Edgar Hoover? They were doing all that stuff 20 years ago about Hoover. And they don't do it now, because it would be a plus. He'd sail through the confirmation hearings. That would be no problemo. For the left. So that's the problem with if you're on the left. The gags from the day before yesterday you can no longer tell. But whatever, and anyway, most of that stuff about J. Edgar Hoover is nonsense. But just for the sake of argument, this guy Comey is way weirder than J. Edgar Hoover. And in a sense, he was just like throwing distractions in the path of the committee on Monday. What we have here, I'm coming to the conclusion that Russia is the retrospective cover story for what these guys were doing. There's no genuine national security angle that justified Ben Rhodes sitting around reading transcripts about Trump's closest advisors during the Trump transition. And that does take us very deep into banana republic territory. And it ought to be a scandal. And as we know, everybody, including half the Republican Party, was mocking Trump for using... In fact, this is, again, Comey basically did a depends what the meaning of the word is on this thing, because he said there was no wiretapping of Trump. Rush mentioned this yesterday. No, Obama didn't get into the top secret spy gear. He wasn't like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, rappelling down the sides of Trump Tower after dark. Bum, 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 doo-doo. He wasn't doing that, and actually wiretapping, tapping wires, installing physical stuff in the basement at Trump Tower, because Trump was using wiretapping in the general sense of surveillance. So Comey knows he's giving a rubbish answer there. Every time I'm on this show, I wind up talking about my Quebecois flautist who had such problems with U.S. immigration. And we did, I can't remember, what are they now? H-2B visas, didn't we? H-1B, H-2B, whatever the hell it was. We got all the paperwork for these guys, and I wrote all the checks to the bozos at Homeland Security. And I did everything I was meant to do. I dotted every I, crossed every T, and they still detained them for 3 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever it was, when they crossed the little border post in the middle of nowhere, even though they had all the paperwork. So I call up Supervisor Williams of U.S. Customs and Border Protection at Highgate Springs, and I yell at him, as is my wont. And I said, "You're detaining my Quebecois flautist." And he said in this rather prissy way, "Oh, I certainly reject that. We are not detaining him." And I said, yes, you are detaining him. He's not allowed to go. He goes, that's not what detaining means. In the fascinating world of CBP, detaining means you actually handcuff them and place them in captivity. And instead, they were detaining them in the sense that they're in a room and they're not allowed to leave the room. But both this Supervisor Williams says to me, so they're not detained, you know. And I said, well, I don't care about that. Why should I care about what the meaning of detention is in CBP? If I was that interested, I'd have made a career in U.S. immigration bureaucracy. I don't care whether detention means, you know, oh, in order to be detained, you have to be shipped to Gitmo and held without trial for 14 years. That's the meaning of detention. In the common parlance, they were detaining my Quebecois flautist. And in the common parlance, Trump was right that he and those around him were being wiretapped. And just think about that. Just think about that. Trump has his faults. Everybody's rehearsed his faults. Everybody spent a year and a half going through all his flaws. But my old debate partner, Nigel Farage, made a good point. I think this was on the radio in London yesterday, when he says that the funny thing about Trump is that when people complain that what he said isn't true, in fact, when you look at it, he's always going in the correct direction. When everyone went bananas over what he said about Sweden, he's right about Sweden. Sweden has now got this extraordinary rate of sexual assaults by Muslim so-called refugees pretending to be 16 and 17 years old, just like that guy in the bathroom at Rockville, Maryland, is pretending to be of high school age. Trump is, generally speaking, heading in the right direction. And the people who are saying, oh, God, he's like gone bananas this time, they're the ones who are getting it wrong. And in this case, Trump is right. Something unprecedented was going on, which is that one political party was intentionally using the vast, boundless security apparatus of the United States to spy on the closest operatives of the incoming administration with a view to damaging them and damaging the Trump presidency. That's the story. You don't need Putin. You don't need foreign enemies when you've got these kind of subversive elements in your own government. You're going to destroy yourself. You don't need another foreign enemy. Doesn't matter whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether the mullahs in Tehran. When you're doing this to yourself, you're going to destroy your own country, and no foreigners need be involved. That's the story of the sham hearings in which Comey participated on Monday this week. Mark Stein for Rush will take your call straight ahead. Bob Gonier writes to correct me, he tweets to correct me, that award for Chelsea Clinton is not a Lifetime Achievement Award. He says it's an award presented by the Lifetime TV channel. Yeah, I've heard that before. It's like, what is it they say about Obama's Nobel Prize? It's not one of those, Scandinavian Nobel Prizes, just an award from Nobel Radio, which is the closed-circuit House of Lords radio station, apparently. Let's go to John in Tulsa, Oklahoma. John, you are live on America's #1 radio show. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about health care. Earlier you were saying a number of things about why the Republicans' bill wouldn't work. And I agree with you on a lot of things, but I disagree with the reasons. Traditionally, we've paid for health care on a fee basis. If you go in for a hip replacement, it costs $40,000. Doesn't matter what the outcome is. You could have a terrible doctor do the procedure. Your outcome could be horrible. You'd still be paid $40,000. You go to an excellent doctor, you get better outcome. We need to change the way we compensate providers if we want to fix the health care situation. We can't continue just to say insurance is the answer, because it's not. That's another way to pay for it.
I don't disagree with that. But what I would disagree to this extent. I knew a guy who got 2 hip replacements in Palm Springs for $12,000 because he offered them a cash deal. My son had I forget what it was, I think it was an $18,000 operation, and I beat Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in New Hampshire down to, I think it was 11 grand on that. But in fact, until Obamacare, you did actually have some freedom to negotiate prices on that. One of the problems with the government intervention in healthcare, John, is that you can't actually put a price on a hip operation. There's no market anymore. So it doesn't even matter. Like, as people know from their deductibles, I mentioned this on this show before. I went to Littleton Hospital and I had an MRI and an X-ray, and I think that was $3,500. And I could have, it might have been an X-ray and a CAT scan. I could have actually flown to Bermuda, stayed at the Princess Hotel, flown first class to Bermuda, stayed at the Princess Hotel, had the X-ray at the King Edward VII Hospital there, flown back, and still come out $1.5 grand ahead. So the government intervention, John, has destroyed the ability to put a market price on a hip replacement.
The free enterprise system works best when the government is not in the middle of it. And medicine should be no different than any other thing. It should be based on outcome. It should be based on quality.
I don't disagree with you on that. And again, I would say this, and that this is why, and you and I agree on this, I think, that this Trump care, Ryan care, McConnell care, whatever the hell it winds up being called, does nothing for that. Because premiums are going to continue to rise, deductibles are going to continue to rise, and the price of an X-ray like mine at Littleton Hospital is actually going to continue to rise because we have now got a massive. Basically, healthcare is a sixth of the entire U.S. economy, so it's bigger than, say, the entire economy of France. It's bigger than the economies of most members of the G20, the 20 biggest economies on Earth. It's bigger. It's bigger than all but 4 or 5 of the world's economies. Except it's not an economy. It's just a massive governmentalized interference with a genuine economy. John, and you are right about that. And that's one thing why I said the key here is simplification. We need a simple private system, and we need a simple public system for those who are either too poor or too incompetent to participate in a private system. And if you were to have that, in other words, we need to scrape all this crud that is encrusted to healthcare and restore a genuine private and public system. And all that this new bill does is add more layers of Republican crud to all the Obama crud that is encrusted to it, and all the Clinton-era carbuncles that are encrusted to it before. And we need to get all that stuff out of the way so that you can actually price a hip replacement again. Yes, Rush is out today. He will be back tomorrow for Open Line Friday. Open Line Friday hosted by a genuine, all-American, real deal in Rush himself, an all-American, American as apple pie Open Line Friday. You won't want to miss that. You don't have to miss Rush any day if you go to rushlimbaugh.com and become a Rush 24/7 subscriber. It means exactly what it says. You get Rush for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think I nearly said 24. Was it 24 days? 24 days every month, 7 months every year, whatever it is. You go to rushlimbaugh.com, become a Rush 24/7 subscriber. You need never be discombobulated by any sinister foreign guest host again. I can't even do the days of the week and count them in American. That's how bad I am. I want to just go back to this guy who was named as the perpetrator of the London attacks that killed, among others, an American tourist, Kent Cochran. visiting London on his 25th wedding anniversary with his wife, Melissa, who is now in hospital. He took not just Melissa Cochrane's future with her husband away from her, but he also tainted their past, in that every wedding anniversary from now until the day she dies will be tainted for her with the memory of the appalling, violent end. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim mayor of London, said last fall, after some terror plot had been thwarted in New York, that this is just part and parcel of life in the big city now, and you just have to get used to it. Oh, sorry, I don't want to get used to it, because I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember when terrorism was not part of life in New York or in Paris or in other great Western cities. I'm old enough to remember the days when Beirut was called the Paris of the Middle East, as opposed to today when Paris is becoming the Beirut of Europe. And I do not want to live in the world people like Sadiq Khan are building for us, because there's a reason why, for example, these things happen in London, and they happen in Brussels, and they happen in Paris, and they happen in Berlin, but they do not happen, for example, in Budapest or in Warsaw or in Bratislava, because they are a consequence of the immigration policies, just as what happened in that bathroom in Rockville, Maryland, are consequences of the immigration policies. They're the consequences of conscious public policy choices that politicians made. And that is why we discuss them on a political program. They're not like a tsunami. They're not like a hurricane that just sweeps in and leaves 17 people dead, and you can't do anything about it unless you believe in the whole global warming thing and that's what causes hurricanes. The man who killed Kent Cochrane and injured his wife and 40 other people is a man called Khalid Massoud. And they're all saying now, oh, British born, British born. As I said in the first hour, citizenship is about allegiance. And you are not a Frenchman if you owe no allegiance to the French state. You are not an American if you owe no allegiance to the United States of America. You're just carrying around a piece of paper. And the piece of paper does not reflect what is in your heart. A passport is not who you are. A driver's license is not who you are. But this is how they always live, because they don't want it to be about immigration and the consequences of ludicrous, imprudent mass immigration. They always do it like this. Kent-born. This is what the BBC has right now at the moment. London attack. Khalid Massoud identified as killer. Kent-born Massoud. Okay, he was born in Kent. So that means he's on you, British people. He's one of yours. He's eating fish and chips. He's watching cricket. He's singing, let's all get down the Strand, have a banana. He's on you, you British people. He's one of you. Just as in the same way, when one of these fascinating guys from the Minnesota area self-detonates in Somalia, it's always, Minneapolis man self-detonates in Somalia, and the State Department pays hundreds of thousands of dollars to gather up all the tiny little pieces of him and fly what's left of him back to Minnesota, because the Minnesota man wouldn't want to be buried anywhere else but Minnesota. And of course he's not a Minnesota man, he's not a Minneapolis man. Any more than the guy who pulled off the Orlando nightclub thing was a Florida man, or the San Bernardino killer was a California man. Kent-born Khalid Massoud, man of Kent, Kentish man. I think there's a pub somewhere in New York State I passed many years ago called Man of Kent. Kent used to be divided into East Kent and West Kent, and one or other of them were Saxons, from the Anglo-Saxons. I think they were West Kent, and East Kent they were Jutes. And that's Jutes, J-U-T-E-S, not Jews. It's not the original Promised Land or anything. And I think in East Kent, they were known as men of Kent, and West Kent they were known as Kentish men, as a way of identifying whether you were a Jute or a Saxon. And now none of that matters, because a Kentish man or a man of Kent is a crazed psycho Muslim who wants to run down people in his car in service of putting the Western world in the house of Islam. And so he's not in any sense, whatever his passport says, he's not a British man in any sense. Whatever his driver's license says, he is not a man of Kent or a Kentish man in any sense, any more than these Minneapolis guys self-detonating in Somalia are Minneapolis men. It is absurd. And people say, well, that just proves that Trump's immigration ban isn't needed, because this man here, who just ran down all these people on Westminster Bridge, he was born in the UK. He's a British man. Immigration's got nothing to do with it. He's the son of an immigrant. Just like the Orlando killer, the guy who slew... And again, I was on the air here when that happened. The guy who killed 50 people in an Orlando nightclub. Not just 50 people, 50 gays, designated members of an official Democrat identity victim group. And they forgot it. They just wrote it off in 15 seconds. In 15 seconds. Amazing to me. Do you remember Matthew Shepard? He was hung on a fence in Wyoming about 15 years ago. And Frank Rich in the New York Times said this is part of an epidemic of gay bashing across the country. It wasn't, in fact. It was just like a weird one-off isolated incident in which, as it turned out years later, a man with whom he had some kind of relationship with, it had all gone horribly wrong. But it was insisted instead by Frank Rich that this was part of homophobia stalking the land from Maine to Hawaii. They wrote plays about Matthew Shepard. They made TV movies about Matthew Shepard. Elton John and Melissa Etheridge wrote songs about Matthew Shepard. But when 50 gay guys, boom, dead at the hands of a guy who's doing it for Allah in Orlando, the left doesn't want to know. Oh, we don't care. There's just like a big pile of dead homosexuals over there. So what? Because in the hierarchy of victimology, it's like whatever they call it, the green-on-green attacks in Afghanistan, when the soldiers we train for the Afghan army wind up shooting the NATO soldiers. They call it green-on-green. And that's like these left-on-left attacks, when one of the Democrats' official victim groups goes full Allahu Akbar on another of the Democrats' victim groups. But in fact... the central proposition of their defense, there's nothing to do with immigrants, is a lie. Essentially, they're saying the Orlando guy was the son of an immigrant. This Kent-born Khalid Massoud is the son of an immigrant in the London attack. And I don't know what argument it is to say, oh, well, this is nothing to do with immigrants. There's no problem at all with immigrants. It's just the children of immigrants who go bananas and kill everybody. So this is not an argument against immigration. In both cases, we are living with the consequences of grossly imprudent immigration policies by deluded members of our political class. And and everywhere has enough troubles of its own. In the United States, people go on about blacks and whites and racism, and the whites enslave blacks, and then they make them sit at separate seats in the lunch counter, and they make them use separate bathrooms and sit in the back of the bus. Okay, just when you're kind of beginning to start to move beyond that, why store up a whole heap of other trouble for yourself? Even to take, like the United Kingdom. They got all this trouble there. I said they didn't used to have terrorism in these cities. That's not true. When I lived in London in the 1980s, every so often the IRA would blow somewhere up. They killed an awfully nice fellow who used to sell me a newspaper a couple of times a week at a newsstand over there. The IRA would occasionally blow people up. So, okay, you think even in a more or less ethnically homogenous state like the United Kingdom, the Scots are currently about to hold a second referendum on whether they don't want to be part of the same country as the English. The Northern Irish are thinking, because the Northern Irish voted to stay in the European Union while England voted to leave the European Union. So the Northern Irish are now both loyalists and Republicans are considering their options. So even in as I said, a relatively ethnically homogenous state where you've just got English, Scots, Welsh, Irish, there are still like vast intractable differences. So let's just add to the fun then by importing a whole bunch of other people who hate English, Scots, Welsh, Irish, all alike. That is what is going on. And this is a very Simon Sharma, a British historian that I have some interaction with on the internet. You can see me getting the best of poor old Simon on a debate in Toronto that's out there on YouTube if you want to look it up. But Simon Sharma tweeted, "The malevolent twerp Farage blames yesterday's atrocity on immigration policy, but the murderer was born in the same place as him, Kent." Don't be a twit all your life, Simon Sharma. This is about the future of your country. Don't be like the Democrats who write off 50 dead gays, the biggest pile in dead gays ever in the United States, and not a single homophobic right-wing redneck American needed to be involved. These are the consequences of immigration policy, and the fact that they extend to the second and third generation, which is now a phenomenon. As you can, if you speak to people in Canada, if you speak to people in the Netherlands, if you speak to people in Germany, they will tell you that second and third generation Muslims born and bred in the United Kingdom, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Germany, and most other parts of the Western world are in fact more radicalized and more than their grandparents and grandparents who came in the 70s, 60s and 50s. This is the consequence of government policy. And the politicians will do anything except hold themselves to account for what they have done to social harmony in the lands they govern. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll take your calls straight ahead. Mark Stein in for Rush. I just want to finish the thought I had when I was talking about these policies, like the fetishization of illegal immigration. In a way, just to bring it back to the British Isles, in a way, these are a bit, the people who govern us are a bit like absentee English landlords in 19th century Ireland. They do not live where you live. And these three poser small towns in New Hampshire that voted to become sanctuary villages at town meeting day last week, Dublin, Harrisville and Lyme, they're all like towns of 1,000 people with one-man police departments. I've just looked this up on the census. This is the 2000 census, 97.29% white. That's Dublin, New Hampshire. As I said, that was the 2000 census, so, in 2010 it might have gone down to 97.18% white. And they're declaring themselves the worst kind of poser exhibitionist progressivism, where they will never have to live with the consequences of the policies they want to impose on you. And that is what is so wicked and pathetic about this kind of liberal gesture politics, this virtue signaling, and why I mean it seriously when I say that any MS-13 gang members go and hold up in Dublin, New Hampshire, 97.29% white. And let's see how much they like MS-13 activity in their shishi little community. This has been a disaster for the Western world, whether we survive it or whether, as in Sweden and Germany, it is an existential change from which there will be no recovery, is one of the great questions of our age. And the irresponsibility of the political class in inflicting a policy for which there was never any popular mandate is disreputable. And as we saw with poor Kurt Cochrane on his 25th wedding anniversary trip to London, it has real consequences for real people. Mark Stein in for Rush. We'll close it out in a moment. I mentioned I'd passed a Man of Kent pub somewhere in upstate New York, and it's been pointed out the Man of Kent is in Hoosick Falls, New York. That's where I passed it. I don't know whether it's a sanctuary pub, although I could use a sanctuary pub after the last 3 hours of news. We're still waiting to hear whether the Freedom Caucus have been strong-armed into signing on to son of Obamacare. They are at the White House now, and the word is that they are still hoping to get the votes to get this thing through the House of Representatives tonight. So keep an eye on all that. Rush will break it all down for you when he returns for the real deal, authentic, full-strength, all-American Open Line Friday, live on the EIB network tomorrow. This has been Mark Stein. See you next time.